Beautiful.
That looks good.
Stan?
Flan?
We're here with Dr. Jackson Crawford. We were wondering if you could introduce yourself to those who don't know you.
Sure. I'm Jackson Crawford. I'm an Old Norse specialist. Got my PhD in Scandinavian philology some years ago at the University of Wisconsin. And I've taught subjects like Norse language, Norse mythology, Sagas, Vikings, and modern Scandinavian languages at the University of California, Los Angeles, University of California, Berkeley, and most recently, University of Colorado, Boulder. I'm also a translator of Norse myths, and nowadays, a YouTuber.
Right. Content creator. Right.
Hashtag content creator.
Nothing like the good old contrast between the credentials to content creator. I'm going through similar experiences at a much lesser degree, might I add. But
well,
yes.
It's a lesser degree about it. It's weird because, I mean, we are not, unless I'm mistaken, 20 years old.
I'm 30.
Yeah. I meet kids who tell me all the time now, oh, I want to be a podcaster.
Right.
I want to be a YouTuber.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a huge aspiration for tons of kids now. And when I was a kid, this wasn't a thing.
No, not even remotely.
It's a whole new career field that people like intentionally like seek out, like in the same way that 30 years ago, I want to be a movie star.
Yeah,
it's like just the new celebrities almost.
Yeah. In a weird, fractured way. I still feel self-conscious about introducing myself, as a YouTuber, because to me it still sounds like, come on, that's not a job.
Right, seriously? Seriously?
Yeah. Sometimes I'll just say writer or ex-professor.
Ex-professor.
Educator or something.
Right.
It's like, I don't want to have this conversation all the time.
Right, right.
Oh, YouTube, huh?
Yeah.
Especially with older people, it's sometimes hard to explain.
Yeah.
But there's something beautiful about the specialization that is almost necessary for YouTubers to exist. Like, it's just like in a university or anything else where you can choose your discipline and really get into it and create content that is useful or meaningful or valuable or entertaining for all kinds of people. And there's, because of YouTube, like a ton of more niches, and I don't know, anything that allows the development of knowledge in specified fields and just development of things, I really appreciate, which is exactly what you're doing. And there's value in that that's hard to explain to people.
Yeah. And, we have this notion, I think, that's baked into us by the educational system that if you didn't pay for it, you didn't learn it. But in fact, YouTube and podcasts and social media in general have been showing for years, you can learn pretty damn well. Yeah. Without paying a cent for it. Yeah. You don't have to pay to watch my videos, and in fact, I make my living from people donating to support their continued existence, not because they have to.
Right.
Whereas teaching at a university, people are paying tens of thousands of dollars a year, and I'm not seeing that money. Yeah. Right. The vice principal, counselor of whatever is seeing some of that money. I'm not seeing it. This way, at least, if you donate to support the channel, you're actually donating to support the person who's teaching you.
Right.
And they're passionate about it. It's not an elective.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, all the end user sees is just you talking to the camera, it from an outsider perspective. And so, you try and explain it to people, and they're like, they don't see everything that goes behind the scenes, all the work, the research that goes into it.
Yeah. And as much as I think that this is actually the future of education, I think it kind of has to be, because people are eventually going to stop paying as much as they have to. Because, I'm still paying back my student loans,
Same here.
And, it is coincidence that I ever got a job in my field, right? When I applied for the job that I got at UCLA in 2011, there were 98 other applicants, right? We overproduce highly specialized people and then tell them the only thing you can do is go try to find a job at a university. And that's just not sustainable either.
Right.
But I think part of what's also kind of weird and socially about this sort of pursuit is it sounds vain, right?
Yep. There's a degree of that for sure.
I set up a camera in the woods and I talk at it, and
look at me. Yeah. Look at me.
And I'm not actually that much of a look at me person.
Right.
So it always feels a little I have a really hard time making videos with someone else watching. right? I always go way into the woods or something. Like I don't just set up at a viewpoint where there's a ton of people, because it's like I feel really self-conscious about like, oh, there's an influencer.
Right, right.
How do you? What are some things that you do to get past that?
Get away from people.
Do it in the woods alone.
I've gotten a little bit better about it over time. I mean, like hanging out with really good YouTubers. I would name in particular Luke Ranieri, who has a channel kind of similar to mine, but he mostly covers classical languages, Latin, Greek, Coptic. And then Ian McCollum of Forgotten Weapons.
Yep.
Two guys who are just incredible career YouTubers. They've helped me kind of get over some of that self-consciousness. You know, a lot of the videos that I've made with those guys, you know, we were in front of crowds or whatever. And the fact is that nobody really actually pays that much attention. It's not that weird anymore. You know, it's weird to me because I'm almost 40. But like to younger people, it's like, oh, that's just a job. It's just like I see somebody working on, you know, sweeping somewhere. It's just like, oh, they're just doing their job.
They're just doing their job. Yeah,
Right.
I feel that.
You know, I feel self-conscious, but other people actually aren't that conscious of me. So
I'm in the camp of just not telling people what I'm doing. Just try to avoid it as much as possible, unless someone asks me what I'm up to. I don't offer that information because for these very reasons, it's like it's not what you think. It's not, when we say content creation, it's more than that. It's a special niche, as you mentioned, and a lot of research goes into it. So yeah.
yeah, I got lectured on this the other day about, you know, the difference between a real educator and a mere content creator, and I just don't buy it. Like, I am a real educator. I just moved from a classroom to a YouTube channel.
Right.
Not to mention, there's sometimes this attitude among some people in the university system that, oh, this is too commercial of an endeavor. It's like, give me a break, without the word I was going to put between A and break.
Right.
They're both commercial endeavors. I'm supporting myself by people voluntarily deciding they want to support me, and you're supporting a lot of other people.
Right.
We're both commercial. It's just that I'm seeing the fruits of my own labors.
Right.
Not to mention, people could choose to not support me.
Right. It's the voluntary action between all
If there wasn't a
parties.
place for it, it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And the degree of transparency as well, right?
Well, and I am, I think, pretty transparent.
Yeah, you are, but when it comes to
yeah.
university, it gets a little like, where's this all going? Oh, well, you know, it goes over here, and it's like, well, what do you mean specifically?
Yeah. Well, and then, you know, there's so much status jockeying. It's such a hierarchical system in the university, you know, like, oh, you can't call yourself professor because you don't have that title. But then if somebody asked me what I did, I'm a professor. I teach at a university. It's a job description to 99.99% of people. But within the university system, oh God, you can't say that, because that's actually like, you know, that's, you know, the top layer of the priesthood.
Right. Right.
So I got tired of that kind of hierarchical system, which isn't as bad. It's not as bad at Colorado as it is at like Berkeley. At Berkeley, it's really bad.
Oh, I bet it's a completely different game there.
Oh yeah, like there were tenured professors who wouldn't even talk to me at Berkeley.
Really? How much did the university dictate your curriculum? Like,
Not that much.
not that much. So you still had a large degree of discretion on what you wanted to teach.
Yeah.
That's good. At least there was
Yeah.
that.
I always wrote my own syllabi. Anybody who tried to interfere just got ignored.
Nice.
And I definitely had that occasionally happen. But no, I taught pretty much, not necessarily the class that I would want to teach. Like at all three universities, I would teach a class called Vikings sometimes, and I never really quite got what that was supposed to be. Right? It's like, is this a history class? Is this a anthropology class? Is this a literature class? So I kind of made it all of the above.
Right.
Right? Without
All
ever.
encompassing, all best of both, all worlds.
Yeah, that always felt like a really unfocused class to me. But at any rate, the actual syllabus that I would draw up for classes was always my own.
Nice. Nice.
And I would use my own materials, often my own books, once my books started to get published, because I was always very conscious of how much students had to pay for their textbooks. And I said, I want my students to pay for $15 books There's
Right.
no reason for students to pay for these $500 books.
Right.
Right. The $15 books are not worse, typically. So,
Right.
anyway.
So all in all, you have a much greater degree of your own personal autonomy.
Well, and now I certainly do.
Yeah, that's what I mean
But-
now. Yeah.
But I always practiced a certain amount of autonomy within the system, too. I mean, I wasn't necessarily somebody you would have expected to find in grad school in some ways. And I feel like we do a disservice to students by kind of, like, as a society, we talk about overcoming stereotypes. We still have a lot of stereotypes.
Sure
We
do.
have stereotypes about who the smart people are. And it's like you can actually be from a cowboy culture background is not what one associates with intellectual pursuits.
Right.
But I always felt like kind of being myself and not being shy about what my own cultural background is that way kind of helped show people like you can be anybody and be interested in this. You don't have to be a stereotypical professor and you don't have to be a wannabe Viking.
Right.
Right? Because I'm definitely not that. I'm not going to dress up. I'm not going to grow my beard 2 feet long and,
Right. Although that'd be cool, but you're not
what-
going to.
I don't know.
The jury's still out on that one.
Get all the rune tattoos and all. Like, that's not who I am. I don't need to pretend to be that.
Right.
So I think there's some value in kind of showing people that you can be anybody and also that you don't have to do a conventional career path with it.
Right.
I did for a while, but all the successes that I've had in teaching have been from doing what people told me not to do.
Right. That's something I picked up on you like very early on. I was like, oh yeah, he's not pretending to be anybody but himself. And that's when I started to make some of the connections. And you've sometimes explicitly, sometimes not, implicitly, the cowboy Havamal, for example, like always making that connection between the country background, but also with the old Norse lifestyle or culture, whatever you'd want to call it. And so that was something that attracted me to you like right away. I was like, oh, it's a good old boy. He knows what he's talking about.
Well, and I think part of what I was trying to do with the cowboy Havamal, which I guess I should clarify for anybody who might listen to this and not know what I'm talking about. Havamal is a poem preserved in one manuscript, the main manuscript of the Poetic Edda, a collection of myths about the Norse gods and heroes, written down in Iceland in the 1200s. And Havamal is the longest of those poems, contains kind of the proverbial wisdom of the god Odin. And it's a lot of just everyday, very practical advice, a little bit of a cynical edge to it.
Right.
Or, if I want to split hairs, a skeptical edge. Not too trusting of other people, very independent-minded. And it always reminded me of my grandfather's advice. And when I had the funniest experience because, he was certainly, the man I admire most in the world. But he certainly never got why on earth I got interested in the stuff that I got interested in and pursued it as a career, just totally outside of his world. Right. But it was so funny to me because anytime I read this thing in Old Norse, I heard his voice. It was him.
Right.
Just talking from a different place in a different time. And in 2012, I ran across a blog post. Do you remember blogs?
Yeah, sure do.
There was a Norwegian blogger who had made something called Havamal for Dummies. So he'd taken all of these wise sayings and he just turned them into 1 or 2 words. So like one that's about just like not talking too much, he just turns it into shut up. Right, that kind of thing.
To the point.
Right,
To the point.
Just
Right.
and it was funny. It was good. Like
Right.
it wasn't a throwaway effort. It was actually really well done. And so I made some comment on his blog, and he responded. And somewhere in this conversation, he said, "And I think you would have to be a Scandinavian to have this kind of personal relationship with Havamal and to do something like this with it." And I thought, no, not at all. I'm not Scandinavian at all, and I absolutely have this relationship, and I know exactly what I'm going to do with it. And I sat down, and in the space of one night, I translated Havamal from Old Norse. It wasn't from my English translation. It was from the original into the cowboy Havamal, which is Havamal in the voice of my grandfather. And it's always kind of been to me like the most me thing that I've ever done.
Right. Yeah, that sounds quite meaningful. It's very fulfilling in your life bucket, if you will. Yeah.
And I was flattered that my publisher wanted to include it in my translation of the Poetic Edda.
Nice.
So my translation of the Poetic Edda and of Havamal, which is a standalone book, includes the cowboy Havamal. It's just kind of a, like, yes, you can translate it more literally, but I think in terms of its spirit, the cowboy Havamal is a spiritually more faithful translation, because it's not dry, everyday English. It's the wisdom of experience that comes through the kind of the scarred voice of an old man imparting sometimes futilely imparting some wisdom to his grandson, you know?
Right.
Sometimes.
Often
Yeah.
futilely.
Yeah.
But that's exactly, so I'm a city boy. I grew up in the suburbs, but within the last couple of years, I've like totally done a 180, and I'm just obsessed with just country culture and living a more simple lifestyle, and calling a spade when you need to call a spade, and so that's what attracts me to Old Norse mythology too, especially like when I saw that you did the cowboy Havamal, I was like, oh my god, yes, I'm seeing that too. Someone else sees the connection there, because it is, at least to me, like it is very reminiscent of like an old grandpa cowboy who just like cut the crap. This is what it is. This is what you need to know. This is the wisdom, if you will. But that cynical element is definitely present, and
it's, you know, at Havamal, there's a line, you can never be sure of where you stand in someone else's heart, so it's best to have wisdom in your own. And like I said, cynical might be split. I might be splitting hairs when I say skeptical rather than cynical, but there's something about that in that kind of country atmosphere in our country too. You know, like there's a big cultural overlap, I think, between frontier Iceland and frontier America.
Right.
Because Iceland was a Viking Age frontier. One of the big differences is that you don't have an indigenous population that the Norse are supplanting. There's not that element in the frontier story. But otherwise, you have a lot of, you know, people in an untamed land.
Right.
You know, very spread out populations. There's no population center in medieval Iceland. You have a martial culture. Everyone is armed. People are very willing to solve disputes in duels, be they with axes and shields or with six shooters. You know, to me, I always kind of thought, well, the sagas are their westerns. And in fact, the sagas are written in a very similar time frame relative to westerns for us. So, you know, you look at the time when westerns really got huge on the screen for us. I would say like the 50s. It's
Spaghetti
not,
westerns.
It's not an unviolent time in its own way. I mean, a lot of the people making these movies are World War II Korean vets, people who saw serious violence. That's not the violence they're showing on screen. The violence they're showing on screen is over quickly. It's clean. Right? The people fighting are honorable. They look each other in the eye. It's not like the actual violence they saw. And the sagas are much the same way. The sagas are written down in the 1200s during a period of civil war in Iceland. And we know from contemporary chronicles, you know, people are cutting other people's ears off and stuff like that. I mean, it's gruesome. That doesn't happen in the sagas. The sagas are clean, honorable fights, you know, mano a mano. And I think, yeah, culturally, this is serving much the same purpose for them as the Westerns have in our own time.
Right.
They're a romantic look back at a time that was not less violent, but that was like better violent. Even if it really wasn't, it gets painted that way.
Right.
And I think that's a real parallel.
So do you think then, with that being said, that it was a better violent, in a way, that any of these Old Norse myths, legends, scripture, whatever you want to call it, do you think that they taught common Old Norse, like daily life commoners, how ought to act? Like
the person they ought to be.
Like in their daily life.
Myths and beliefs shape that.
I think a little bit. I think Havamal is definitely intended that way, right? Odin is definitely imparting lessons directly, right? You ought to do this and you ought not to do that. I think if you look at the sagas, it's a little bit harder to find quote-unquote morals in them. And when you do, they can sometimes be a little bit foreign, more foreign to what we would impart. So for example, there's a saga, Hrafnkel saga, which is about this chieftain Hrafnkel, who is made an oath, and of course they take oaths and promises very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
He's made an oath that no one can ride his best stallion, and that he'll kill anybody who tries to ride a stallion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he has a shepherd, sheepherder boy, from a poor family who, works for him in the summers and rounds up his sheep, and he loses some sheep, and he's afraid, to go back to his boss and tell him, oh, I've lost some sheep. And he thinks, I need to grab a horse so I can, cover some more ground and find the sheep. Only horse anywhere close is the stallion. He thinks he won't know. But of course, after he's ridden the horse gallops off to Havamal, and he's all sweaty, and Havamal knows somebody rode him. Asks around, and people have seen the kid riding him. So he regrets it, but he made an oath.
Mm-hmm.
He goes to this kid and he says, and you can kind of hear the hesitation even in the Old Norse. He says, "Did you ride Havamal? The horse is called Freyfoxy. Did you ride Freyfoxy a little?" And the kid admits it. He says, well, I swore that I would kill anybody who rode the horse. And he kills him.
Mm-hmm.
Kills this teenage kid who works for him. Buries him. Feels bad about it, but he made a promise.
Right.
He goes to the guy's dad and he says, I hate to tell you, I killed your kid, but I made a promise that I would kill anybody who rode my horse. I just want to tell you, I feel so bad about this. I'm going to set you up for life. Right, I'm going to pay for your kids' marriages, and I'm going to make sure that you're well fed for the rest of your life. Like, I really want to kind of make this up to you. It's like this is insane from our cultural perspective.
Right.
Listen,
Yeah.
man, I killed your kid, and I feel bad about it. Let me pay your rent for the rest of your life.
Is that a fair exchange? You okay with
Well,
that?
and the dad doesn't feel it is, right? The dad says, no, I don't care what you offer. I'm suing you, which the sagas are full of legal battles. I'm suing you. I'm going to make the state take this out of you. I'm not taking this as a gift from the guy who killed my kid. And so it turns into a huge, several years of back and forth between this family and this chieftain. But at the end, the guy who comes out on top is the chieftain. And it's because he's a guy who keeps his word. People know where they stand with this guy. It's like, yeah, he says he's going to kill someone who rides his horse. By God, he's going to kill the person who rides his horse. And so he winds up being a more successful person than the family that comes after him for killing their son. There's a lesson there, maybe a moral about keeping your word, but told in a way that's extremely hard for us to stomach if we think about it in our present day time.
Right.
So, I don't want to overstretch the similarities between these cultures,
Right.
But there's a little bit of moralizing. It's just not necessarily what we would moralize.
Mm-hmm.
Right, just a different context, different time.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, there's no police power. Right. So people sue each other, but then they have to enforce the penalty.
I see. So they did not elect people from their community to enforce laws. There's
no
a
enforcement.
self-sufficient
Yeah.
enclosure.
Right.
Each individual.
There's the thing, their legislature / court, and you go and you can sue people, and the jury can say, yes, so and so owes so and so however many sheep or however many reams of cloth or something like that. But you have to enforce it. You have to go to the guy and get that stuff. There's no police that are going to collect. There's no prison.
So do you also see that kind of self-sufficient attitude, cultural attitude, just permeating the entire culture as a whole? Just like
Absolutely.
Self-sufficiency in terms of your shelter, in terms of your oaths, in terms of the law, in terms of whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a society where people are really spread out, where, there's very little use of the written word, some use, but very little use of it. Your reputation is everything, and you have to keep up a reputation of being self-sufficient, of being strong, of being ready to defend your family if someone insults or takes something from them. And, those insults to one's capabilities to do those things often start the conflicts in sagas, right? Because of course, if your reputation is on the line, your entire social life is on the line. All right, someone says that you don't keep your word. Well, maybe you need to go kill that guy, because if you say you're going to kill anybody who insults you, you've got to kind of live up to that. In fact, they even hold you to oaths that you make when you're drunk.
Oh, really?
That can be a big
harsh.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
That would also be culturally a problem today.
Yeah. In fact, they have kind of an equivalent to Christmas/New Year's at roughly the winter solstice.
Okay.
Big drinking festival. And also, kind of like New Year's for us, a time for swearing oaths or resolutions, right? Your oaths made during this celebration are extra sacred, but you're probably pretty drunk.
Probably.
Right, I mean, this is, according to the saga, how the famous Ragnar Lothbrok died, as he swore at one of these New Year's Yule celebrations, while drunk, that he would conquer England with 2 ships.
All right.
Which is insane.
Yeah.
But, you know, he wakes up the next morning and says, oh, crap, what did I swear an oath to do? It's like, he swore to conquer England with 2 ships. It's like, well, all right. You know, it's part of being a dranger. And this is the ultimate Norse compliment, a dranger, D-R-E-N-G-R. It means someone who's recklessly courageous and sort of recklessly honest in that way. Like, you don't swear something that you don't mean to do.
Right.
I mean, the greatest of the Norse sagas, the Saga of the Volsungs, a lot of the action is hinged around Brynhildr, a Valkyrie who swears she'll never marry anyone but the only man who doesn't know fear. But she winds up marrying a man who does know fear. To make a very long story short, someone else marries the man who knows no fear. And so she says, well, now I have to get the man who knows no fear, Sigurdur, I have to get him killed because I'm not married to him. I have to, like, that sounds a little insane to us too. But the drama is just, you know, she was forced to break her word. Now she has to extract a violent payment for it.
There's something, it seems to be a theme that the truth is paramount above all else.
Which is common in a lot of societies.
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, you see that in Zoroastrianism is huge on truth versus the lie, maybe bigger than the Norse are. But absolutely, keeping your word, which in a lot of rural societies is also a big deal, right? If your 5 neighbors are the 5 people that you can get resources from, they have to know that you're going to pay them what you say you're going to pay them.
Right.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. So you had mentioned keeping those oaths, even oaths that you make while you're drunk. That's another parallel that I see is like saloon culture in the frontier, right? Drinking, always drinking. It's very reminiscent of these drinking halls, you know.
Yeah, a little bit. I can see a similarity. I don't know if there's a cowboy afterlife where you have a saloon fight every day, which would be pretty much the equivalent of all hole, but that's a funny idea. You know, yeah, there are also societies that deal a lot with drinking problems.
Oh, really?
Right. I mean, there are problem drunks in the sagas, just as there are, you know, filling westerns or filling the lives of real, you know, look at Buffalo Bill's life.
Right.
You know, it's weird to observe that today, this very day, I'm 7 years sober.
You mentioned 7 years today. So first off, congratulations.
Thank you.
I personally I know several people who are recovering and or have been sober for some time now, and that family members, close family members, means quite a lot to me. I know it's extremely difficult for somebody to be able to recover from whatever it may be, alcohol or any kind of substance. I know it requires a why in a way. If I may ask, could you synthesize what gets you through challenges, hardship, to maintain your even keel and sobriety? And
well, sure. Let me start off by talking a little bit about how I got sober, because that may play into this a little bit. So I worked at UCLA for 3 years, which is actually really where my problem started. I was, to make a long story short, doing someone else's job and getting a lot of it was a bad scene, had some kind of abusive stuff going on there. felt pretty powerless, felt a little directionless, like, well, I teach where I have to teach, because I got a stupid degree. I've started feeling worse about what I was doing professionally. It's a long time before any of my public education efforts. Just felt like I was kind of at a dead end, and I was in California, which is where a lot of people want to be, but it's not where I want to be.
Right.
Good old boy. We talked about it.
Yeah. LA was not really for me. It's better than Berkeley in some ways. Anyway, I developed a pretty bad problem, and I have a weird pituitary thing where I don't have the hormone that keeps water in your body.
Oh, really?
So I can put a lot of liquid through myself. So you haven't seen the beginning of it, especially when I have a medication that replaces the hormone now, but I didn't then. So I got to where I could drink 2 bottles of whiskey in a day. And of course, you drink that much whiskey, you start needing it.
Yeah.
And, I was functional. In fact, extremely few people knew that I had a problem. I was drinking alone, right? I wasn't going to bars. I was just going home and just, nursing bottles of Jack.
Right.
But then my job at UCLA ceased to exist, which is a long horseshit story. And it was late in the school year, and I had to get something. So I applied to all of these jobs in Colorado and Wyoming, because I figured if I can't do something with my professional background, I might as well be somewhere I like. Got a job at a little museum in Wyoming. Did that for a year. Then I got hired at Berkeley in 2015. Went out there and actually took a huge pay cut from my museum job in Wyoming. So all of a sudden I have this really expensive drinking habit and no way to support it, right? Because I'm making $1,600 a month and I'm paying $1,200 a month for rent, right? And the kind of drinking I was doing was a lot more than $400 a month, and then I have to eat. Right. So I thought,
Priorities.
yeah. So I'm like, crap, I better cut back. So I had this weird attitude toward, it's funny looking back on, I was kind of like, well, let me do this scientifically. So for 10 days, I said, I'm not going to change how much I drink, I'm going to measure it. And of course, when I actually measured it, I said, oh, wow, I might be an alcoholic, which should have been obvious. But, like kind of making that realization was a little bit scary.
Right.
I thought, okay, what I'm going to do is since I might have a dependency on this, I'm going to cut back like a cup every week.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? I'm going to cut myself off a little bit less every week.
Gradual challenges,
Yeah. Unfortunately, the first week I did that, I developed DTs.
Oh.
I was that dependent on it.
Wow.
So I was actually in my office at Berkeley when I just suddenly went, tunnel vision and shrimped up and was shaking and stuff like, oh shit, this is delirium tremens. So I clawed my office door open, thankfully ran into nobody in the hallway, pushed the elevator button, went down,
This is all funny in retrospect.
It is
sure.
in retrospect, but at the time I was kind of scared.
Right.
Went over to the clinic on campus and said, and they looked at me pretty weird and said, I'm an alcoholic trying to quit and I feel really weird. Like, oh crap, they put me down on a stretcher and, they tie me down and stuff. Like, oh, apparently my vitals look pretty bad. And anyway, I wind up in the ER. They get me settled and the doctor says, so someone told me you were looking to quit. And I said, yeah. And he said, you want some help with that? And I said, absolutely. And he said, okay, well, I can advise 2 different programs. It's the one everybody likes, and there's the one that seems to get people sober. And I said, give me their number.
Yeah, right.
So I went to this rehab facility in downtown Oakland. Definitely no vacation.
Downtown Oakland. Okay, nice. Nice.
But I haven't had a drink since that day, and that was October 9th, 2015.
Well, thank you for sharing this day with us.
Yeah. Well, I feel like actually part of the positivity that I can do in this world is, I'm nothing special. There's nothing special about the fact that I got sober. It's, if I can do it, anyone can. But it definitely, I don't know. Rehab is a weird scene. I'm not in touch with any of the people that I was in rehab with. Like you're really close while you're in there, and then nobody wants to talk after.
Right.
So I don't know where any of them are, or how any of them are doing. I know a lot of them were there because they were court ordered to be there.
Okay.
And those people never seem to me to have the kind of resolve that it would actually take. That's when you say, I have a problem, I need to get it dealt with. So, you know, it's a classic AA thing, and I'm actually not an AA, but it's a classic AA thing to say, well, you have to start by admitting you have a problem. You absolutely do. But part of what's kept me going is just saying, you know, I'm going to have problems in my life, and I'm going to deal with them better if I'm sober. Right? Drinking never actually helped the problem. It maybe let me ignore it, but it actually added to my problems. Eventually, I was going to have some serious health effects from drinking as much as I did. Right? I have family members who definitely have some health effects from drinking that much. And, you know, every time that I get tempted to, and I've been tempted to within the last week, you know, it's pretty freaking easy to get a bottle of whiskey.
It's convenient, very convenient to get it.
It's a liquor store right there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the thing that always stops me is this is not going to make it better. And there's other things that taste good.
Right.
I might as well have a glass of lemonade because it's going to make as much difference.
Right.
Right. And I'm serious. As pat and plain as that sounds, that's what gets me through, is just saying it's not going to make it better. The problem is still going to be there, and I'm just going to be less equipped to deal with it. And I've had moments where I've been real close, but that has been somehow what gets me through it. And then a little bit of what gets me through too, like maybe 20% of it, is every day there's a little bit more pride. Right? Like there was pride. It's like, yeah, I made it a month. Then like today I've made it 7 years. Like I don't want to fuck with that.
Yeah.
Excuse me if I'm cussing.
Nope, we don't care. We're all about it.
But it's like, you know, I don't want to mess with that street. It's a good street.
Yeah.
It's a great street.
That's a record to to be proud of.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't want to mess with that. Like, you know, if I take a drink and it's like, okay, I stayed sober for 7 years and now 3 days or whatever it is. Like that I don't want to be there. If I am, actually, here's a weird thought. If this helps anybody dealing with substance abuse, I told myself day one of quitting, if I have a relapse, I'm going to forgive myself for it.
That's interesting.
And that sounds like I'm making a permission structure for it. It's actually the opposite. Because if I say, I feel like this is actually something that screws up a lot of people on the recovery path, is they say like any lapse, it's this attitude of like, okay, if I let myself be talked into a drink, basically I've let myself be talked into 40 drinks, because that's about where I was at some weekends. But I feel like if I ever let myself get talked into a drink, I feel ready to stop myself there and forgive myself and say, this doesn't have to turn into 40 drinks. But I think something happens where people say, well, if I have one drink, I might as well just go back to where I was at. It's like, no, I don't feel that way. All right, there is forgiveness for myself. I can say, yeah, one drink is too bad, but I forgive myself. I'm back on the path.
Right.
And to me, that's actually the opposite of I feel like the whole like all or nothing is actually the opposite. All or nothing is a permission slip for all. But I'm also a huge anti-perfectionist.
Oh yeah, really.
Perfect is the enemy of the good. It's one of my favorite cliches. But it's true. I see it in grad students all the time in a totally different context. The people who never get their PhDs because their dissertations aren't perfect, but nothing's ever perfect.
Yep. We have a similar sentiment. We say perfection doesn't exist.
Yeah, perfectionism it's an excuse for not doing. I see it in language learning. People who say, I'm not going to speak this language until I can speak it perfect. You're never going to speak it perfect unless you're making mistakes speaking it imperfect.
Right.
I like that advice. I personally am one that has an issue with that, a little bit of a perfectionist, because I get frozen in making decisions or making things final. There's something about it that just is difficult for me. So when you say that, I really like that advice. It resonates with me. Doesn't come natural, that. It's something I have to work at.
Doesn't come natural. You know, actually, it's not like I'm some wise individual who came up with all this. I know who's wiser than I am, and I have tended to listen to people who have learned from their experiences. you know, a lot of what I say is maybe redigested from my grandfather or from my late best friend, actually, who was, you know, when we were in high school, was a great anti-perfectionist. And in fact, when he died when we were in high school, 20 miles from here. And I think that there was a huge sense in me when he passed, like, he pointed the way toward living more. And he would have lived more than I had by this point. But like, he pointed the way toward just life is short, and for him it was incredibly tragically short.
Right.
Perfection is the enemy of living those days. I'm not trying to say that I let myself off with shoddy work, I don't. But, you know, I was willing to let my dissertation go after 3 years. Like, it didn't need another year.
Right.
I was willing to, you know, publish or have published a translation of the Poetic Edda, knowing that I was going to want to revise things. I have revised things since, but what I put out was good.
Right.
It's better now. It probably would be better now if I had done it now.
Right.
But I did it when it was needed. Right. You know, and I think this holds people back. And now I'm getting preachy. This holds people back in relationships too. It's like, there's not really the perfect person.
Yeah, that was a hard one for me to learn. Yeah.
Like, it's something that movies infect us with the idea of, but it's like, no, there's good, there's no perfect.
Right. No perfect.
Yeah. There's a solid match, but not past that.
Yeah, I had to learn that one the hard way. That took me a
we all
while to get over that. I was like, oh, the perfect woman doesn't exist. This imaginary person doesn't exist. We're all just imperfect humans.
And I'm not the perfect man.
Yes, and I'm no. I'm an insufferable man. I'm insufferable, and I should be weary of people who are interested in me. That's how insufferable I am.
Yeah.
That's me learning the hard way. Yeah.
So do you mind if we shift gears real quick?
Yeah, I got too preachy anyway.
No, not at all. No, this is what it's meaningful for you, and that's we're after that sort of stuff. Those valuable lessons that you learn throughout life those are important to us.
You caught me on a philosophical day, and also like having just like had this unsolicited email criticizing my particular pursuit. It's like I'm simultaneously like pseudo-philosophical and defensive.
Hey, that's fair.
It's good to take a break from the stoicism, you know? I really let it all out.
I don't think of myself as this stoic.
I know.
But it's interesting to me that people read that. I hear that word all the time. I'm like, okay.
I think it's just the calmness and the steadiness throughout all that interactions and activities and daily. You just even keeled, if that makes sense. I think that's where it comes from.
Like cowboys, like real rough and tumble cowboys who have been through it, they have a similar attitude.
I guess. I mean, I'm not that old, but it's, as Indiana Jones says, it's not the years, it's the mileage, right? I've seen things.
Maybe old at heart.
Yeah, maybe. And just, you know, I'm sure a lot of it also is just, I wanted so bad to be my grandfather when I was a kid. And I think even if I never became the substance of him, in so many ways, it became the style of him.
Right.
So, sir, talking about Norse mythology, if we may, could you give us an overview about the origin story? And then maybe we just start there, like just a brief introduction of, go ahead, sir.
I was going to say perhaps for simpletons like myself, because I listened to it and I was like, there's a lot going on here.
So the Norse creation myth, you mean? So, yeah, let me do a little bit of base setting about sources. So I mentioned there's the Poetic Edda. So these are poems written down in the 1200s in Iceland during a period when Icelanders are really interested in their frontier past. Now, of course, their frontier past is pre-Christian. And there's a lot of interest in even Christian Iceland in that pre-Christian religion. It's a small country. People aren't as judgmental, or well, they're not as condemnatory about their past beliefs. Like, people are pretty frank. Like, yeah, our grandparents, our great-grandparents believed in other gods. It's not the same like witch hunt atmospheres in a lot of Europe. So someone was passing down these stories orally in poems long enough for them to be written down in the 1200s, about 200 years after the conversion of Iceland. So these stories are surviving a pretty long time. We're actually pretty confident that the stories are much older than the 1200s because language changes over time, right? So if you think about how your own language probably differs from your grandparents' language, mine does. Maybe mine does less because I was a grandparent worshiper, and I did pick up some weird grandparent features. But one thing my grandparents would do that just about nobody does anymore is they would say the H in words like which and what and where.
Yeah.
Very few people do that now. So if you, to make an analogy, if you have a poem using alliteration, right, starting with the same sounds, and somebody in English alliterates which and house, for most speakers today, which doesn't start with an H, it starts with a W. Mm-hmm. So you would say this poem is probably from early 20th century or before. This isn't from the 21st century, even if it's written down in the 21st century. Mm-hmm. Same thing, you see something written by Shakespeare, it might be published in the 21st century, but you see words like thou and thee, and you can say, this is from a much earlier century. So the same thing we're seeing with these poems which use alliteration. Sometimes the alliteration actually doesn't work during the time it's written down. Right, the language has changed, it's moved on. But the alliteration would work 200, 300 years before, when the country was pagan. So we think on linguistic evidence more than anything else that these poems are in fact as old as the pre-Christian religion. They're not just made up in the Christian period by people trying to, make entertaining stories about the old gods. Mm. There's also a book called the Prose Edda, which, I hate how similar the titles are, but I don't control this stuff. This is what we call these books in English. This guy, Snorri Sturluson, who was a scholar and chieftain in Iceland in the 1200s, knew a lot of these poems, and knew a lot of poems that didn't get written down in the Poetic Edda, knew a lot of the ones that did get written down there, but he tried to turn them into one cohesive story. And that's the Prose Edda. It's written out in prose, right, in ordinary language, but based on some of those old poems. So it's those two sources primarily that we use. And what we get from reading a combination of the Poetic and the Prose Edda is that at the beginning there is a vast empty space, Ginnunga gap, the yawning gap, and there's a hot side of it and there's a cold side of it. Water flows out of the cold side and freezes in the cold, empty nothingness in between. But as it drifts toward the hot side, which is Muspelsheimer, it melts, and out of the dripping, melting ice and the void is formed the first living being, this man, giant, anti-god. Actually, the real mythical texts are much vaguer about what species or kind of being than our comic book interpretations are. He is just a being. Although he is of the family that becomes the anti-gods or giants, the enemies of the gods. So he's formed from that. Of course, he has no mate, but his sweat creates some children. Children grow in his armpits, and one of his legs mates with the other, and that creates some children, and that's the first living intelligent being. There's also a cow that is created out of the dripping ice, and she's named Auðumbla, and she licks another man, god, being out of the ice, and that's Buri. And so the male descendants of Buri are the gods, and the male descendants of Ymir are the Jotnar, which is usually translated giant in English, but they're not a different scale from the gods. They're the same height. They all look human. They're the same species, if you will. They're just kind of rival families. And they interbreed quite a bit. So in fact, depending on who you count as what, you could consider Odin like 3/4 a giant, which is really not reflected in our comic book versions of it.
Yeah, most people don't know that.
Yeah, the giants, like in the Marvel movies, are the huge blue things, but they're just human-looking things at the same scale as the gods. So the grandchildren of Buri, so Buri is his son Bur. I don't know who he mates with. Maybe one of the leg or sweat children of Ymir. And that's actually another thing, is our sources don't answer all the questions we would want to see answered. There's a ton of I don't knows that the medieval audience apparently either didn't care about or didn't remember. But Buri is a son Bur, who has 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve. They kill Ymir, the original living being, and they tear apart his body and they make the world out of it. So his blood becomes the sea, his flesh becomes the earth, his bones become the mountains, his teeth become the rocks. His brains are the clouds, his skull is the sky, etc., etc. And the world that is made thereby is actually the world that's kind of shared by all of these beings. We have often our 21st century conception is that these are all different planets, like there's the gods on one planet, humans on one planet, giants on one planet. But it's really one planet, right? Medieval people don't have a conception of multiple planets.
Right.
Right, that's a very modern conception.
Yes, good point.
It's humans live in Midgarður, which is the middle enclosure. So it's kind of picture the Atlantic as this vast interior ocean surrounded by a ring of land, right? Europe, Africa, and the Americas. This is actually, by the way, this mythic understanding of the world is part of why they thought there was land across the Atlantic that kept them going west till they found Greenland and eventually North America. Well, Iceland, Greenland, North America. So that's an interior ocean surrounded by a ring of land, but they conceive there being an outer ocean around that ring of land. And so at the outer edge is a huge fence. It's made of Ymir's eyebrows. Beyond that is the exterior ocean, where the great serpent Jormungandr lives. And Jormungandr encircles the planet and swallows its tail at the end. And beyond that exterior ocean is Jotunheimar, the homes of the giants, or I really like the term anti-gods. They're of similar stature to the gods, just opposed to them. That's where they live. Somewhere high up, and it's very inconsistently described. Is it at the top of high mountains? Is it in the sky somewhere? Very inconsistently described. It's where the gods are. And Osgarður, the god enclosure.
Okay.
And they come to our world fairly frequently, especially the god Odin. But of course, return to their own worlds, where they have their halls, where they feast. They eat, they drink, they sleep, they die, just like we do, which is fairly different from some mythic systems. And of course, at the end, they're going to be defeated by their enemies, by the anti-gods or giants, which I think is also a pretty unique feature of Norse myth. The gods are eventually going to die. They will be defeated. They are not triumphant in the end.
Right. And is that in Ragnarok?
Yeah, Ragnarok.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my bad on that.
That's right.
So, question for you: in the origin story, the North and the South, the cold and the hot, if I'm not mistaken, and the void. Is there anything substantial or significant to you about the contrast between those two worlds and their combination in the void? I mean, is that?
I think maybe a little bit. To the Norse, cold and the direction of north tend to be negative, which might not shock you, considering that living in Scandinavia, of course, cold is more often an enemy than heat.
Yeah.
Although, the summers can be pretty hot. And it's actually interesting to me, you read in the Sagas, you do get pretty realistic depictions of it was too hot to wear armor. Right, and that makes sense to me, of course. I don't know that it's a particularly elemental mythology, right? Your heat, your cold, your water, your air, your fire, your earth. It's not, at least in the sources as we have them preserved, it does not deal with a lot of elemental absolutes.
Right.
And the gods themselves are not particularly elemental in terms of their embodiments. We always want to say so-and-so's god of war, god of fire, god of love, whatever. It's really hard to pin those labels on the Norse gods. They're much more personalities than roles. I have a great sense of what it would be like to sit down and talk to Thor. I have a great sense of what Odin's motivations are, but what their like powers are, much harder to say.
So it's not necessarily elemental per se. So would it be accurate, or would it be more accurate or more inaccurate to say that it's not elemental, but it's an analogy for something else? Perhaps an analogy, for example, of how ought to act. Like maybe there's this contrast before, like the North symbolizes something, the South symbolizes something else, and the ideal is to be in between those things, but something more akin to like a motif, like if it was like a film, like what's the motif of the film? Like, is there anything resonating there?
Well, I don't think that you want to behave like the gods. Gods are actually not great examples of behavior. Odin is a liar. In fact, in Havamal, he asks himself, who can trust Odin? Right? It's one of my favorite quotes. Who can trust Odin? Odin. Right,
I like his style.
Well, he's a liar. He wants to get people killed in battle, because of course Odin knows, thanks to prophecy, that he's going to die at Ragnarok. So he gets men killed in battle. It's the only way they can come to his hall, as if they die in battle. And of course he wants to build up the best army that he can in his own hall to help him fight his enemies at Ragnarok. He is, in a sense, although probably better than his enemies, he's kind of an enemy to our happy lives on Earth. You don't want Odin in your life. When Odin shows up in a saga, someone is going to get killed. It's going to be pretty bad, right? Because he wants to harvest you when you're young, too. Most of us are not Tom Brady, right?
Yeah. There's only one Tom Brady.
Odin or Loki is a wizard, right? They have magic powers they can use. It's not always very clear what those powers are, but they come up as the story demands.
Right.
Thor is strong. That's his power. And he's actually not even strong enough on his own to lift his own hammer, right? He has to wear a special belt and gloves to increase his strength and actually lift his own weapon, which is weird in a way.
Yeah, it really is.
And then you think about the fact that the gods are all permanently injured one way or another. Odin is missing an eye. Heimdall is probably missing an ear. Tyr is missing a hand. Thor has shrapnel in his head. All the gods are injured, right? They're marred. They're not perfect specimens. They've been hurt badly.
They can be injured like humans, like us mere mortals.
And it lasts. There's no magic solution to it. There's no, Tyr doesn't regrow a hand or get something built for him, or, out of some magical substance or something. It's just gone.
Right. Well, so Odin sacrifices his eye for wisdom, right?
Yeah.
And that's substantial. I think that there's some sort of meaning behind that, like story as to why the eye would be lost for wisdom. What about the other gods? Sort of their injuries related to their powers, or related to something substantial about their story?
Yeah, they're all relevant. Odin is obsessed with gaining wisdom because what he wants is to find out a way to avoid his death at Ragnarok. Right? He's trying to learn how to escape this fate. He knows he's going to be swallowed by the wolf. So there's a well, and there's actually conflicting stories about this in Snorri's Prose Edda and in a saga that Snorri wrote. But there's a well owned by a being called Mimir, who is just a head. And if you drink from the well, you become wise. Of course, Odin wants a drink, but Mimir says, the price is your eye. So Odin has left an eye, it never says which one, in the well in exchange for a drink. And we don't know specifically what he learned, but hopefully something worth his time.
Right.
And his misery, agony. We don't know how Heimdall lost his ear, and it's only kind of hinted when the witch. So there's a poem called Völuspá in the Poetic Edda, which is where we actually have the prophecy of Ragnarok. When the witch is talking about how she knows where Odin's eye is hidden, she makes a similar cryptic remark about Heimdallr's hearing, which suggests Heimdall is also missing an ear in a similar way, but we don't know what the story behind that is or what he might have gained. But he is the watchman, so maybe he has extra good hearing, so he had to give up an ear to hear better out of another. I don't know. That's just speculation.
Right.
Thor had a duel with an anti-god or giant named Hrungnir. They threw their weapons at one another. Thor threw his hammer and Hrungnir threw a whetstone. The hammer smashed the whetstone in midair, and a fragment of it embedded itself in Thor's skull. So of course he was fulfilling his role as defender of the gods, and that's how he got injured, so that's fitting.
Right.
And then Tyr, actually a god who's not well known within our original sources. If you look his name up on the internet, you'll find all kinds of things. But in our original sources, there's basically one story about him, which is that when the god, so Loki and an evil woman, one of the giants or anti-goddesses named Angrboda, they had 3 children. One of them is the snake that encircles the world. One of them is Hel, the half-corpse woman who rules the world of the dead, and one of them is the wolf Fenrir. Notice, this is not Mendelian genetics.
Right.
Right.
It's not like they both had a recessive gene for wolf, you know, and it's very weird. But these humanoid beings have 2 out of 3 non-humanoid kids.
It reminds me of Loki turning into the horse and then having a baby horse, and it's like
but that one has 8 legs for some reason.
Yeah.
So they know, thanks to prophecy, that this wolf is going to kill Odin at Ragnarok. But the wolf is born inside Oscar. They're inside the god's enclosure, and of course, they've sworn an oath that they won't draw blood inside Oscar, so they can't kill it. So what are we going to do with it? Well, let's bind it up forever, because they also can't. I guess they can't like cheat the rules and like take it outside and kill it. So they try to bind the wolf up with chains, but the wolf is so strong that it can break any chain. So the gods go to the dwarves and they say, you need to make a chain that is so strong that even the thing that can break all chains can't break it. Right.
This is where they make the silk thing, right?
Yep. So they make an apparently silk thread, but what it's made out of is things that don't exist. Because it has to be strong enough to be broken by the thing that can break anything.
Right.
So they make it out of women's beards and fish's breath. And the roots of mountains and the sinews of a bear. Because apparently, you know, if you watch a bear, like it kind of doesn't look like it has muscles. It just looks like one carpet.
Okay.
All my favorite things.
Yeah.
All of these things.
And the sound of a cat walking. And
very pleasant.
I feel like I'm forgetting one, but it's things that don't exist. So the gods bring this chain to the wolf, and they say, well, they've been kind of having a game with the wolf at this point, like, hey, break out of this, and it always breaks out. So we'll break out of this, and the wolf looks at it suspiciously, right? Like maybe he sees some fish's breath in there, or something, you know, I don't know. He's suspicious of it, and he says, I don't know, maybe this will bind me up forever. I need one of you to put his hand in my mouth as a pledge that this won't bind me up forever. And so of all the gods, it's only Tyr who steps forward and puts his right hand in the wolf's mouth as a pledge that this is not being done
nefariously
in false premises. Of course, it is a trap. It is treachery. It does bind the wolf forever, so it bites off Tyr's hand. So, you know, he pays a huge price for lying, which you can see a big current of that truth versus falsehood again.
Right. I like that.
Of course, he's a heroic figure for doing that, but he pays a huge price. And Snorri, when he tells the story in the Prose Edda, he actually says, everyone laughed but Tyr.
With good reason. With good reason.
So yeah, all the gods are maimed in some way. And I think that's so different from how we think of gods typically, or think of them in a Greco-Roman or Christian context as, if not perfect, very close.
We appreciate the time very much.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, this has been pretty insightful and a generally good time, so thank you.
I don't know if you want to plug how to find you,
Easy enough to find. My YouTube channel is just my name, Jackson Crawford. If you search that, you'll probably find me.
Dr. Jackson Crawford, right? Just want to make sure everybody knows.
Some people insist on that. I insisted on that for the first few weeks after I got a PhD, but eventually you get tired of saying, no, I'm not a medical doctor.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So just Jackson Crawford across all the sites?
Yep. Easy to find. And my books, my translations of the Poetic Edda, Sagas, Pretty easy to find. Just search for my name.
Very reasonably priced as well.
Reasonably priced.
Yes.
It's true.
Yes.
Although we, this year, for the 50th anniversary of my publisher, Hackett Publishing, they've created a special limited edition box set.
Ooh.
Yeah, which are all signed.
Would make great gifts.
They would make great gifts. The first printing, they made 400, and those sold out surprisingly fast. So we're doing another printing of 800.
Wow.
Probably by Christmas.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah. I'm actually in the middle of signing all of these.
One by one.
One by one, but it's
With the doctor?
no. I've never signed that. That's
That would be weird.
I just feel like outside of a classroom, if you're not a medical doctor,
Right.
doctor is saying, I want to create distance between you and me. I have something you don't, and I am not a better person or a smarter person than someone else because I spent
giving you a
more time
hard
at
time.
school. But that's, oh no, I'm just saying what my attitude is toward it, right?
Right.
Like I feel self-conscious about it. Like I'm not a big deal,
Right.
you know, because
None
I
of us are.
PhD. Yeah.
None of
it's
us
just,
are.
I don't need to throw that around unless it's relevant.
Right. Right.
So,
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Dr. Jackson. Thank you.
you can say what you want.
Appreciate it. Stand and Flan over and out. Sweet.
All right.